Welcome, dear viewers. An exclusive episode will be dropping tomorrow along with the daily episode. Join our membership to watch the exclusive stories. Enjoy. People say Wyoming is empty. They're wrong. The land isn't empty. It's waiting, watching, listening. My name is Jack Willoughby, and I've been a sheriff's deputy in Carbon County for 8 years now. Before you ask, no, I wasn't born here. I'm what locals call a transplant, though after nearly a decade, you'd think that label would have worn off by now. I came to Medicine Bow after doing a stint with Denver PD. City policing burned me out faster than summer lightning. Too many faces, too much noise. I needed space to breathe, to hear myself think again. When the posting opened up, I jumped at it like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. Medicine Bow, Wyoming. Population, 270 souls, give or take. It's not the kind of place that shows up on maps, unless they're the detailed kind. The town sits like a weathered thumbprint pressed into the vast emptiness of the high plains. The centerpiece of our little town is the Virginian Hotel. It's this hulking 3-story red brick building from 1911, named after Owen Wister's novel. Most days, it's the only splash of color against our dusty, wind-beaten landscape. The hotel stands proud on the corner of Lincoln Highway and First Street, its windows reflecting the vast Wyoming sky like tired eyes that have seen too much. When I first arrived, Sheriff Blackwood, stern-faced Tom Blackwood with his silver-streaked mustache and eyes that could freeze beer, didn't tell me about the woman in beige. Didn't mention how the night desk at the Virginian sometimes gets calls from room 307 when it's empty, or how guests wake up to find their belongings rearranged. "It's just tourist nonsense," he'd said when I finally asked him about it 3 months in. But his eyes shifted away when he said it, and Tom Blackwood's eyes never shifted away from anything. I learned the story anyway, from Hazel at the diner. The woman in beige arrived in 1912, fresh off the train from Boston. She'd been writing to a man who worked the coal mines, letters full of promises and plans. She waited in room 307 for 2 weeks. On the 15th day, she received word he'd taken up with a woman from Laramie. That night, she put on her finest beige dress, wrote a letter, and threw herself through the window of room 307, tumbling through the glass and the dark to the unforgiving ground below. They say on quiet nights, you can still hear the sound of glass shattering, followed by a terrible silence. They say sometimes the window in 307 repairs itself, only to break again when nobody's looking. They say a lot of things in Medicine Bow when the wind dies down, and there's nothing left to do but talk. I didn't believe any of it. Not at first. Then came the first call from Martha Weber's antique shop. "Jack, it's that music box again." Martha's voice wavered over the line. "It keeps playing on its own, and I've removed the mechanism 3 times now." Martha's shop, Sage and Dusty Treasures, sits kitty corner from the Virginian. It's a repository for the discarded history of 100 homesteads and failed ranches. Items with stories attached to them. Items people couldn't quite bring themselves to destroy, but couldn't bear to keep. The shop had gained a reputation. Things moved at night. Music boxes played without mechanisms. Rocking chairs creaked when nobody was sitting in them. I'd written it off as Martha's attempts to drum up business through local color, until I saw it happen myself. But that's getting ahead of things. You need to understand what Medicine Bow is to understand the rules. It sits at a crossroads, not just the literal intersection of highways, but something older. The Arapaho knew it. The first settlers knew it too, though they tried to forget. I didn't know the rules when I started. Nobody tells you outright. You learn them one by one, usually after breaking them. I've collected them now, written them down in a leather notebook I keep in my breast pocket, right next to my badge. This is my warning to you. This is how I learned to survive in a town where the wind carries voices and the night holds more than darkness. These are the rules. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. last Tuesday. I remember checking my watch as the radio crackled to life, because in Medicine Bow, nothing good happens after midnight. Deputy Willoughby, we've got a disturbance at the Virginian. Room 307. Dispatch was Ellie Tanner, a woman who'd been routing calls in this county since before I was born. Anyone hurt? I asked, already turning my patrol truck around. Guests in adjoining rooms reported screaming, then glass breaking. A pause. Nobody's in 307, Jack. It's been vacant 3 weeks. My headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness as I pulled up to the Virginian. The night manager, Pete Haskell, waited for me under the yellow porch light, his thin frame shivering despite the mild May night. "Third time this month," he said, not bothering with hello. "Owner's gonna have my hide if we keep losing guests." "Show me," I said. Rule number 1 appeared to me that night, though I didn't know to call it that yet. We climbed the creaking stairs to the 3rd floor, Pete's keychain jangling with each step. "Room's open," he whispered at the end of the corridor. The door to 307 stood ajar, a slice of darkness beyond. I drew my flashlight, not my gun. Experience had taught me that whatever waited in 307 wouldn't be stopped by bullets. The window was intact, always is, to the naked eye. But as I swept my beam across the floorboards, I saw them, tiny fragments of glass catching the light like fallen stars. "See?" Pete's voice quavered. "Window's fine, but there's always glass. And listen." We stood in silence. The old hotel's walls creaked and settled around us. Then came a sound like fingernails trailing across the window pane. "She's here," Pete whispered. That was when the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me, and I caught a whiff of lavender and something metallic, like old pennies. "Back up," I said, guiding Pete toward the door. "Back up now." The door slammed shut. The lock turned with a decisive click. I've been in enough tight spots to know panic is a luxury you can't afford. "Who's there?" I asked, voice firm. No answer, but the lavender scent intensified. "Ma'am," I tried again, remembering the story. "We mean no disrespect." A soft sigh swept through the room, lifting the curtains through the window remained closed. That's when I noticed the envelope on the bed. Yellowed with age, sealed with wax. It hadn't been there when we entered. I approached slowly, Pete frozen by the door. The name scrawled across the front in faded ink. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood. "That's not possible," Pete breathed. "Tom's grandfather was sheriff here in the 30s. I picked up the letter. The moment my fingers touched the paper, the lock clicked open. "Do not open that here," Pete said, suddenly urgent. "Take it outside, now." We scrambled down the stairs and out into the night air. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal under the hotel's porch light. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting delicate and precise. "Tell him I know he lied. Tell him I know what he did to me." "What does it mean?" Pete asked. Before I could answer, my radio crackled. "Jack, we've got another call. Martha Weber's reporting activity at the shop." I looked at Pete. "Stay here. Keep everyone away from 307 until morning." "What about the letter?" I folded it into my pocket. "I'll handle it." The drive to Martha's shop took less than a minute. Main Street was deserted, the storefronts dark sentinels against the night sky. Only sage and dusty treasures showed signs of life. A pale light flickering in the back room. Martha waited by the door, her gray hair wild around her face. "It's the rocking chair this time," she said, leading me inside without preamble. The shop was a labyrinth of memories: old furniture, vintage clothes, toys and trinkets from bygone eras. In the center of it all sat a hand-carved rocking chair, moving gently back and forth. Nobody was sitting in it. "Been going for an hour now," Martha said. "And look what I found underneath it." She handed me a crumpled photograph. A man in an old-fashioned suit stood beside a woman in a beige dress. Their faces were scratched out. "Turn it over," Martha urged. On the back, in the same handwriting as the letter, "Thomas and Eleanor, April 1912. "Eleanor?" I asked. "The woman in beige," Martha whispered. "Her name was Eleanor Winters. They never mentioned her fiancé's name in the stories." "Thomas," I said, the pieces clicking together, like Blackwood. The rocking chair stopped abruptly. A music box on a nearby shelf began to play, its tinny melody cutting through the silence. Martha moved quickly, grabbing my arm. "Don't look at it," she hissed. "First rule, never look directly at anything that moves on its own." I averted my eyes from the music box. "There are rules." "Of course there are rules," Martha sighed. "Tom never told you?" "Typical. He thinks ignoring things makes them go away." The music stopped. "It's safe now," Martha said. "But you need to know the rules, Jack. For your own safety. For everyone's." I took out my notebook. "Tell me." Martha looked at the letter and photograph in my hand. "Those need to go back to 3:07 before dawn. Second rule: what belongs to the dead must return to the dead before sunrise." I wrote it down, sensing the weight of what I was stepping into. "What else?" "Too many to cover tonight," Martha said, glancing at the window. "But I'll tell you the third since you'll need it soon. Never speak to anyone who calls your name after midnight unless you see their face first." As if on cue, a voice drifted through the shop, calling softly from the darkened street outside. "Jack? Jack, I need your help." It was Tom Blackwood's voice. But Sheriff Blackwood was supposed to be in Cheyenne for a conference until tomorrow. Martha's fingers dug into my arm. "Don't answer," she whispered. The voice came again, floating through the night air. "Jack? I can see you in there. I need your help with something." It sounded exactly like Tom Blackwood, the gravel rough cadence, the slight Wyoming drawl that 50 years in the state will give you. But something in Martha's eyes kept me rooted to the spot. "Rule 3, she murmured. "Remember, Rule 3. I nodded, keeping my silence. My hand drifted to my sidearm, more from instinct than any belief it would help. "Jack, for God's sake, man." The voice hardened with irritation. "Martha Weber's filling your head with nonsense. Come out here." Martha reached past me to flip the shop's lights off. We stood in darkness, the only illumination coming from the distant street lamps filtering through the dusty windows. Footsteps approached the shop door, heavy, familiar boots on wooden boards. A shadow fell across the glass. "He looks just like Tom," I whispered. "It's not him," Martha insisted. "Tom called me yesterday from Cheyenne. His car broke down. He won't be back until tomorrow afternoon." The doorknob rattled. Once, twice, then silence. We waited 5 minutes before Martha dared to turn a small lamp back on. The street outside was empty. "What was that?" I asked, my mouth dry. Martha moved to a cabinet behind the counter and pulled out a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. "We call them echoes," she said, pouring generous measures. "They take familiar forms, use familiar voices." She pushed a glass toward me. "They're not ghosts, exactly. More like impressions left in the fabric of this place." I took a long swallow, welcoming the burn. "Are they dangerous?" "Some are. Some just want attention." Martha sipped her drink. The one that looks like Tom is among the worst. It's patient. It will wait until you forget the rules. I pulled out my notebook. So Rule 3, never speak to anyone who calls after midnight unless I see their face. And verify it's really them, Martha added. Ask a question only they would know the answer to. I nodded, writing it down. Why didn't Tom tell me any of this when I took the job? Martha's laugh held no humor. Tom Blackwood has spent his entire life pretending this town is normal. His father did the same, and his grandfather before him. She touched the photograph on the counter. This town's strangeness is tied to his family somehow. I think he hoped if he ignored it all, it might leave him alone. But it doesn't work that way, I guessed. No, Martha sighed. It doesn't. The rules still apply whether you acknowledge them or not. Breaking them has consequences. She refilled our glasses. That's why we've had so many deputies come and go over the years. Those who don't learn the rules don't last. I thought back over my 8 years in Medicine Bow. The odd calls that never made it into official reports. The nights when the radio picked up voices speaking in tongues. The way Tom always handled certain properties himself, never sending me alone. Rule 4, Martha said, interrupting my thoughts. Never enter the Virginian Hotel between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. If you find yourself inside during that hour, stay in a public area. Don't enter any guest rooms, don't use the stairs, and don't look into mirrors. I wrote it down. Why that specific hour? It's when Eleanor died. The hotel changes during that time. Halls rearrange. Doors lead to different places. Martha touched the music box that had played earlier. People have gone missing. Some reappeared days later with no memory of where they'd been. Others never came back at all. The weight of what I was learning pressed down on me. How many rules are there? 12 that I know of, Martha replied. Tom probably knows more. My radio crackled, making us both jump. It was Ellie at dispatch. Jack got another call from the Virginian. Guests reporting screaming from 3:07 again. I looked at my watch. 3:14 a.m. Can't go now, Martha said firmly. Rule 4, remember? You'll have to wait until after 4. I keep my radio. Tell Pete to keep everyone in their rooms. I'll be there at 4:05. Copy that, Ellie responded, not questioning the specific timing. She knows the rules too? I asked. Martha nodded. Everyone who stays in Medicine Bow longer than a season learns them or leaves. Most leave. I thought about the letter in my pocket. Rule 2 says I need to return this to 3:07 before sunrise. Yes, but after 4 a.m., Martha clarified. Rule 5. If you have to handle objects connected to the dead, always wear gloves after touching them once. The connection grows stronger with each contact. I slipped on the leather gloves I kept in my jacket pocket before carefully folding the letter and photograph into an envelope. What about your shop? I asked. These objects. I gestured around at the antiques surrounding us. Most are harmless. Those with attachments I keep contained. She lifted the music box, showing me the strange symbols carved into its base. Salt circles, iron filings, blessed silver in some cases. Rule 6. Containment symbols must never be broken, not even to clean them. I wrote it down. And the rocking chair? Some things can't be contained, only respected. Martha's eyes drifted to the now still chair. Rule 7. Acknowledge what you see, but never show fear. They feed on fear. The clock on the wall read 3:47, almost time. I should head to the hotel, I said, standing. Martha gripped my hand. Be careful with that letter, Jack. Eleanor Winters has been waiting a long time to deliver it. She won't let go easily. What do you think happened? Between her and Tom's grandfather? Martha's expression darkened. The story everyone tells, about the fiancé who abandoned her. I've never found evidence it's true. No records of any man from Boston courting her. But there are old photos of Thomas Blackwood Sr. with Eleanor in town archives. She released my hand. I think the Blackwood family rewrote history. I pocketed my notebook. Why would they do that? That's what you need to find out. Martha moved to a shelf and retrieved a small tin. Dried sage and sweetgrass, burns clean, keeps certain things at bay. Rule 8. Always carry protection. I accepted the tin, tucking it into my jacket. Thanks, Martha. Don't thank me yet, she replied grimly. Knowledge of the rules makes you responsible for upholding them. Outside, the night had deepened, stars sharp against the vast Wyoming sky. My truck sat where I'd left it, though frost now coated the windows despite the mild spring night. Rule 9 came to me as I approached my vehicle. I didn't need Martha to explain this one. Somehow, I knew. I walked around my truck, checking underneath and in the bed before opening the door. Never enter a vehicle that's colder than it should be without checking every inch first. Nothing seemed amiss, yet I hesitated before turning the key. The photograph in my pocket felt heavier than paper should. Across the street, the Virginian's windows glowed yellow against the night. All except the third-floor corner window, room 307, which remained dark despite the reported activity. As I watched, a figure in pale clothing appeared behind the glass, the silhouette of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her hair pinned up in the style of a century past. She raised her hand and pressed it against the window pane. The glass cracked with a sound that carried clearly through the quiet night. My watch read 4:01 a.m., 3 more minutes to wait. No answer came, but the drawer of the bedside table slowly opened. I approached and carefully placed the envelope inside. Is there anything else you need, Miss Winters? The drawer shut with a soft click. On the bed, the impression of someone sitting appeared, weight dimpling the mattress. Pete remained in the doorway, eyes wide. Jack, he hissed. You can't just talk to her. But something told me it was okay. Rule 12, I said quietly. When returning what was taken, speak plainly and with respect. The bed creaked as the invisible weight shifted. The scent of lavender intensified, joined now by the metallic tang I'd noticed earlier. Blood, I realized. The smell of old blood. A notebook appeared on the bed. Not mine, but an old leather journal with yellowed pages. It opened by itself, pages flipping before settling. A fountain pen rolled from beneath the pillow and rose, suspended in midair over the open page. I stepped closer and read what was already written there. April 18th, 1912. Thomas says we must keep our love secret a while longer. His father would never accept me as suitable. I've agreed to 1 more month of sneaking about like criminals, though it pains me deeply. I love him so completely, I can scarcely breathe when we're apart. The floating pen began to write in the same elegant hand. He promised to meet me tonight, to give me a proper ring at last. I've waited long enough. The pen dropped, the notebook closed. Another drawer opened, this one in the desk. Inside lay a tarnished silver hairpin with a small pearl. What's that? I asked. The hairpin rose and moved toward me. I hesitated, then held out my hand. The pin dropped onto my palm, cold as ice against my skin. You want me to have this? The light bulb overhead flickered once. Yes. I pocketed the hairpin. Thank you. Behind me, Pete cleared his throat. Jack, we should go. It's almost dawn. He was right. Pink light had begun to edge the horizon through the window. I made my way back to the door, turning once more toward the room. I'll find out what happened to you, I promised. The truth. The door closed itself gently as we stepped into the hallway. Pete exhaled shakily. 20 years working this hotel, and I've never seen her so calm, he said. Usually there's crying, breaking glass, cold spots that burn your skin. What did you do? Treated her like a person, I replied. Not a ghost story. The walk back down the corridor felt normal, the right length. I still counted the stairs on our descent, just to be safe. Outside, dawn painted the town in watercolor hues of rose and gold. Main Street would soon stir to life. Ellis at the diner firing up the grill, Roy unlocking the hardware store, locals stopping for coffee before heading to work on surrounding ranches. Will you tell Tom about this when he gets back? Pete asked as we reached the lobby. I thought about Blackwood's grandfather and Eleanor Winters, about family secrets buried for a century. Some of it, I hedged. Listen, Pete, do you know if the hotel keeps records going back to 1912? Guest registers, employee files, that sort of thing? Basement storage has boxes of old paperwork. Owner won't throw anything away. Says it's historical. Pete yawned, the night's events catching up to him. Why? Just curious about Eleanor's story. You're poking a hornet's nest, Jack. Pete shook his head. The Blackwoods have run this county for generations. Tom's not gonna like you digging into family history. Maybe not, I conceded. But there's a woman who's been stuck in room 307 for over 100 years. Don't you think she deserves the truth? I left Pete contemplating that and drove back to the station to file my report. The official version anyway, the one that would say I responded to a noise complaint of the Virginian and found nothing amiss. The real events would go into my personal notebook alongside the rules. The station was quiet at this early hour. I brewed coffee and sat at my desk, removing the silver hairpin from my pocket. Under the fluorescent lights, I could see faint engravings on its surface, initials and a date, TB and EW 1911. Whatever had happened between Thomas Blackwood Sr. and Eleanor Winters, they had been more than passing acquaintances, and somewhere in town were records that might tell me the rest of the story. My shift officially ended at 8, but I stayed to greet the day dispatcher and brief him on the night's events, the sanitized version. Then I headed to the county archives, housed in the basement of our small library. Meredith Langtree, the town's librarian for the past 30 years, raised an eyebrow as I explained my interest in 1912 newspapers and town records. Eleanor Winters? She asked, her voice dropping to library-appropriate levels. That's a name I haven't heard in some time. Not since. She stopped herself. Since when? Meredith glanced around, though we were alone among the stacks. Since Tom's father died, she finished. There was talk back then. Walter Blackwood, Tom's father, made quite a scene at his own dad's funeral in '73. Drunk, shouting about family sins and debts unpaid. Do you know what he meant? She shook her head. But I remember one thing he said clear as day. She won't stay buried just because we put him in the ground. Meredith, were the Blackwoods and Eleanor Winters connected somehow? You'd have to ask Tom. She pulled a heavy key ring from her cardigan pocket. But if you're determined to look into it, I know where to start. She led me to a locked room at the back of the basement, unlocking 3 separate bolts before pushing open the creaking door. Inside, metal shelving held dozens of acid-free boxes and leather-bound ledgers. Town records, Meredith explained. Birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, property deeds. Everything since Medicine Bow was founded. I stepped forward, but she blocked my path. Before you go in, she said, her voice serious, there's another rule you should know. Rule 13. When searching for truth in old records, never read aloud any names of the deceased you don't already know. Some names are summonings. She pressed a small jar into my hand, salt mixed with what looked like dried rosemary. Line the threshold of any room where you read the old papers, she instructed. And Jack, whatever you find, be careful who you share it with. Some secrets have teeth. With that cryptic warning, she left me alone among the dust-covered records of Medicine Bow's past, the weight of Eleanor's hairpin heavy in my pocket. The archives room smelled of old paper and dust. I carefully sprinkled Meredith's salt mixture across the threshold before closing the door behind me. Where to start? The room contained a century of Medicine Bow's history. I decided to begin with death records, pulling the leather-bound volume for 1912. The book creaked as I opened it on the reading table, pages brittle with age. April's entries were halfway through. I ran my finger down the list of names, careful not to read any aloud. April 19th, 1912. Eleanor Winters, 26, female. Cause of death: fall from height. Ruled suicide. Simple, straightforward, matching the story everyone told. I flipped to the coroner's notes at the back of the ledger. Subject suffered multiple fractures consistent with impact from third-story fall. Glass lacerations on hands and forearms indicate she broke through window. Time of death estimated 3:15 to 3:30 a.m. Nothing surprising, yet something felt off. I pulled out Eleanor's hairpin and studied it again. If she'd been engaged to a miner from back east, why did her hairpin bear Thomas Blackwood's initials? I moved to the newspaper archives next, finding the bound volume of the Medicine Bow Gazette for spring 1912. The April 20th edition carried a small item on page 3. Tragic death at Virginian Hotel. Miss Eleanor Winters, 26, a recent arrival from Boston, was found deceased outside the Virginian Hotel in the early hours of Friday morning. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood Sr. reports Miss Winters appears to have taken her own life by jumping from her room window. No note was found. Miss Winters had no known relations in the area. Services will be held Saturday at Mercy Chapel. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood Sr., the very man whose initials were on Eleanor's hairpin, had investigated her death. The same man whose grandson now served as my boss. I returned to the death records, this time checking June 1912. There it was. Thomas Blackwood Sr., 31, male. Cause of death: gunshot wound to chest, ruled suicide. 2 months after Eleanor died, Thomas Blackwood Sr. had taken his own life. That couldn't be coincidence. The marriage records revealed nothing. No license for Eleanor Winters and Thomas Blackwood Sr., nor for Eleanor and any other man. I checked property records next and found something interesting. Eleanor had purchased a small house on Willow Street in March 1912, just weeks before her death. Why would a woman waiting for her fiancé buy property? A yellowed envelope fell from between the pages as I closed the property ledger. Inside was a telegram dated April 17th, 1912. To Sheriff T. Blackwood, Medicine Bow, Wyoming investigation complete stop. Miss Winters has no fiancé in Boston. Stop no connections to mining industry. Stop her story appears false. Stop will send full report with next train. Stop regards. Pinkerton Agency, Denver. This changed everything. Eleanor had no fiancé from back east. The story everyone in town repeated was a lie. I dug deeper, looking for Thomas Blackwood Sr.'s personal effects. In a dusty box marked Sheriff's Office 1912. I found his daily logbook. The entry for April 18th, the day before Eleanor died, was brief but revealing. E visited office today. Becoming difficult. Threatens to tell Mary about the child. Cannot allow scandal. Will speak with her tonight, make arrangements. Mary would be Mary Blackwood. Thomas's wife, and the child. Was Eleanor pregnant with the sheriff's baby? Further searching uncovered the Pinkerton Agency's full report, detailing Eleanor's background, a teacher from Boston who'd left her position suddenly in January 1912. Neighbors reported she'd been involved with a married man. She'd withdrawn her entire savings before heading west. A photograph slipped from the file, Eleanor with a group of schoolchildren in Boston. She wore a high-necked dress, her hair pinned with the same silver hairpin now in my pocket. Her face was pretty, serious, nothing like the vengeful spirit of local legends. The last document I found was tucked into Thomas Blackwood Sarah's personal Bible, a letter in Eleanor's handwriting, dated April 18th, 1912. My dearest Thomas, you leave me no choice but to act. 3 months I've waited, believing your promises. I did not come all this way, leave behind my life and reputation, to be hidden away while you play family man in town. I know why you hired those detectives. You hope to discredit me, to find some flaw in my character that would justify your abandonment. You will not find it. I have told no lies, except the one you asked me to tell, that I wait for a fiancé who does not exist. Our child deserves your name. I deserve better than shadows and secret meetings. Tonight I expect your answer, marriage or exposure. I will no longer be your shame. With what love remains, Eleanor, I sat back, piecing it together. Eleanor and Thomas had been involved. She'd come to Wyoming pregnant with his child. He'd created the story of her waiting for a fiancé to explain her presence while he figured out what to do. When she threatened to expose him, she ended up dead. The official story, suicide after her fiancé abandoned her, was a convenient fiction, likely created by Thomas himself as sheriff. But why had he killed himself 2 months later? Guilt? Or something else? I was so absorbed in these revelations that I didn't notice the temperature dropping until my breath clouded before me. The scent of lavender filled the room. Eleanor? I said softly. The pages of the open Bible fluttered. The telegram from the Pinkerton Agency lifted slightly, then settled. I'm learning the truth, I told the empty air. You weren't waiting for any fiancé. You were involved with Thomas Blackwood. A single sheet of paper slid from beneath the Bible, blank, yellowed with age. The pencil beside my notebook rolled across the table and rose, suspended in the air. Words formed on the page in elegant script. He came to my room that night. We argued. He had his service revolver. The pencil dropped. The temperature plummeted further, frost forming on the metal shelving. He killed you, I said, the truth dawning. It wasn't suicide. He murdered you and covered it up. The salt line at the door scattered as if swept by invisible hands. The door creaked open. Rule 13 echoed in my mind. Never read aloud names of the deceased you don't already know. I'd been careful about that, but perhaps there was a rule I didn't know yet. Eleanor, what's happening? I asked, rising from my chair. No answer came, but the cold air pushed at my back, urging me toward the door. I gathered the most important documents, the letter, the telegram, Thomas's logbook entry, and tucked them into my jacket beside my notebook. Outside the archives, Meredith waited, face tight with worry. You need to leave, she said without preamble. Now, take the back exit. Why? What's... Tom Blackwood is back early. He's upstairs, asking for you. Her eyes flicked to my bulging pocket. He knows you're down here. A door slammed somewhere above, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. Rule 14, Meredith whispered urgently. When the past and present collide, choose a side quickly. Those who hesitate get caught in between. I nodded my thanks and headed for the rear door. Outside, the morning had grown overcast, dark clouds gathering over Medicine Bow. My truck sat where I'd left it in the library's back lot, but something about it looked wrong. Too dark inside, the windows too reflective. Rule 9 flashed in my mind. Never enter a vehicle that's colder than it should be without checking every inch first. I approached cautiously. Frost covered the door handle despite the spring warmth. Through the window, I could make out a shape in the driver's seat. The outline of a man in an old-fashioned sheriff's uniform, head bent at an unnatural angle. Not my truck anymore. Not safe. I backed away, hearing the library's rear door open behind me. Heavy footsteps approached. "Willoughby!" Tom Blackwood's voice rang out. "What the hell are you doing in the archives?" I turned slowly. Sheriff Blackwood stood 20 feet away, his face thunderous beneath his gray mustache. One hand rested on his service weapon. "Learning some local history," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Those records are restricted," he growled. "County business only." "Murder is county business," I said, "even when it happened in 1912. Blackwood's face went slack with shock, then hardened into something dangerous. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I, Tom?" Eleanor Winters wasn't waiting for any fiancé. She was pregnant with your grandfather's child when he killed her. Thunder rumbled overhead. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and lavender. "That's ancient history," Blackwood said, his voice dropping. "Best left buried." "Is it buried, though? She's still here, still waiting for justice." Blackwood took a step toward me. "I've protected this town for 30 years. Protected it from her. From what my grandfather's actions unleashed. You have no idea what you're meddling with." Behind him, at the corner of the library, a pale figure appeared. A woman in a beige dress, her hair pinned up in the style of a century past. Blood stained her clothes where she had struck the ground in her fatal fall. Eleanor had left the hotel. She was here, watching. And judging by the widening of Blackwood's eyes as he noticed my gaze shift past him, he could see her too. "She's here," Blackwood whispered, his hand falling from his weapon. "God help us, she's out." Eleanor stood motionless, her form more solid than I'd seen in room 307. Water droplets passed through her as rain began to fall, yet she remained dry, like a projection against the weather. "Tom," I said carefully, "what's really going on here?" Blackwood's attention snapped back to me. "Get in my car, now." "I don't think—" "This isn't a request, Deputy." His voice hardened with authority. "We need to get off the street. Rule 15. When the dead walk in daylight, find sanctuary in places they've never been." I hesitated, weighing my options. Eleanor remained at the corner, watching us with unblinking eyes. "She won't hurt me," I said. "She's been trying to tell her story." "You don't understand what she's become." Blackwood opened his cruiser's door. "She started as a wronged woman, but a century of anger twists a soul. Get in." A crash from the library made us both jump, glass shattering as every window on the ground floor blew outward simultaneously. Meredith rushed from the building, clutching a book to her chest, glass dust sparkling in her gray hair. "Tom," she called, "the archives are burning." Smoke poured from the library's broken windows, thick and black. Through the haze, I could see flames consuming the very records I'd been examining minutes before. Eleanor's form flickered, then reappeared closer to us, her expression sorrowful rather than vengeful. "Fine." I slid into Blackwood's cruiser. He and Meredith followed, the librarian clutching her book with white knuckles in the back seat. "The Blackwood Ranch," Tom instructed as he peeled away from the curb. "It's never been in town registers. She won't know to follow us there." In the rearview mirror, Eleanor's form dissolved into mist that joined the raindrops. "What's happening, Tom?" I demanded as we sped through town. Locals stood on sidewalks, watching the library burn despite the rain. The fire truck would come from Rollins, 30 minutes away at best. "The balance is broken," he replied grimly. "The rules maintained order. You've been bending them, breaking them, without understanding their purpose." "What rules did I break?" I asked, indignant. "I've been writing them down, following them." "Rule 16, Meredith interjected from the back seat. "Never carry objects belonging to the dead away from their resting place." My hand went to my pocket, feeling Eleanor's hairpin. "This, and whatever else you took from the archives," Tom added. "Items hold memories, connections. They're anchors that allow spirits to move beyond their bounds." We turned onto a dirt road heading north of town, the cruiser's tires spraying mud as we accelerated. The Blackwood Ranch lay 10 miles outside Medicine Bow, a property that had been in the family since the 1890s. "I've got her letter," I admitted, "and your grandfather's logbook entry. The telegram from the Pinkerton agency, too." Tom cursed under his breath. "You've created a tether, a direct line between her and the truth she's been seeking all these years. Isn't that good? Doesn't she deserve to rest?" "Rest?" Tom's laugh was hollow. "Jack, she doesn't want rest. She wants vengeance on the entire Blackwood line." Wind battered the cruiser as the storm intensified. Lightning flashed across the prairie, illuminating the empty landscape. "Your grandfather murdered her," I said flatly. "Covered it up." "Yes." Tom's answer surprised me with its bluntness. "And he paid for it." "By killing himself?" Meredith leaned forward. "Show him the book, Tom. He needs to understand." Tom nodded, eyes still on the rain-slicked road. "Medicine Bow isn't like other places," he began. "The town sits on a convergence point, a place where the barrier between worlds thins naturally. The Arapaho knew it. They never camped here, just passed through quickly. What does that have to do with Eleanor? When someone dies violently here, especially with intense emotion, rage, betrayal, desperation, they can get caught, trapped between worlds." Tom gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Eleanor's death created a tear. My grandfather knew what he'd done, what he'd unleashed." Meredith opened her book, a journal bound in cracked leather. "This is Walter Blackwood's diary, Tom's father. He recorded everything." She turned to a marked page and read aloud. "June 14th, 1912. Father shot himself today, but not before telling me everything. He claimed it was the only way to contain what he'd unleashed when he killed Eleanor. His blood was required to seal the breach." "A life for a life," Tom said. It partially worked. Eleanor remained bound to the Virginian, to room 307 specifically. My father created the rules based on patterns he observed, ways to maintain the balance, keep her contained. Rain hammered the roof as we pulled into the long driveway of the Blackwood Ranch. The house was a sturdy 2-story affair of logs and stone, built to withstand Wyoming winters. "But why maintain the lie?" I asked as we parked. "Why not tell the truth about what happened to her?" "Because the truth would have freed her," Tom replied, shutting off the engine. "The rules work because they're built on the framework of the original deception. Change the story. Change the rules." We dashed through the downpour to the house's wide porch. Tom unlocked the door, ushering us inside before securing 3 separate deadbolts behind us. The interior was surprisingly modern, despite the ranch's historical exterior. Updated kitchen, comfortable furniture, walls lined with bookshelves. Tom moved directly to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of bourbon, pouring 3 glasses without asking. The rules, I said, accepting a drink. They're not just superstitions. They're containment protocols. Exactly. Tom knocked back his bourbon in one swallow. For generations, the Blackwood family has maintained those rules, taught them to those who needed to know, all to keep Eleanor's spirit contained while allowing the town to function. But if Thomas killed himself to contain her, why is she still here? Meredith placed Walter's journal on the coffee table. Because it wasn't enough. A willing sacrifice would have closed the breach completely. Thomas's suicide was born of guilt and fear, not atonement. Thunder boomed directly overhead. The lights flickered, then stabilized. So, what happens now? I asked. Tom refilled his glass. She'll try to find us. The physical connections you've made, the hairpin, the documents, they're like breadcrumbs for her to follow. But this property has protections. He led us to his study, where a large map of Medicine Bow and surrounding areas hung on the wall. Red pins marked various locations around town: the Virginian Hotel, the library, Martha's shop, the sheriff's station. These are the places where the barrier is thinnest, Tom explained. Places where other incidents have occurred over the years. We monitor them, maintain containment where needed. Other incidents? I asked. You mean other ghosts? Eleanor's not the only restless spirit in Medicine Bow. Meredith opened the journal again. Walter documented 17 distinct entities between 1912 and 1973. But Eleanor is different, Tom added. More powerful, more coherent. Most spirits are just echoes, repetitive energy. Eleanor has maintained her consciousness for over a century, gathering strength. I removed the hairpin from my pocket and placed it on Tom's desk. I need to return this to her. Not yet, Tom cautioned. Rule 17. Only attempt to correct a spiritual breach at the place it originated. The Virginian, I said. Room 307. Yes, but we need to prepare. Now that she's broken free from the hotel, she'll be harder to contain. A phone rang from the kitchen. Tom excused himself to answer it, leaving me with Meredith. Did you know? I asked her. About Thomas murdering Eleanor? Not until 20 years ago, she admitted. When Tom's father died, Tom needed someone else to know the full history, to help maintain the rules if anything happened to him. And you agreed to this? Protecting a murderer's legacy? Meredith's eyes flashed. I agreed to protecting the town. The living matter more than the dead, Jack. No matter how wronged the dead might be. Tom returned, his expression grim. That was Pete from the Virginian. The woman in beige has been seen in the lobby, the dining room, the basement. She's moving freely throughout the hotel for the first time. Anyone hurt? I asked. Not yet. But the temperature's dropping throughout the building, windows frosting over despite the heat being on full blast. Tom retrieved a worn leather-bound book from his desk drawer. We need to perform the containment ritual. Tonight. He opened the book to reveal handwritten pages covered in symbols I didn't recognize. My grandfather learned this from an Arapaho medicine man before what happened with Eleanor. The family has preserved the knowledge. A ritual? I asked skeptically. Seriously? The rules aren't random superstitions, Jack, Meredith said. They're fragments of larger protective measures, simplified for everyday use. Tom traced a symbol on the page. We need to return Eleanor's possessions to room 307 during the hour of her death, between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., and perform the ritual that will bind her to the room again. That violates Rule 4, I pointed out. Never enter the Virginian between 3 and 4 a.m. Some rules must be broken to restore balance, Tom replied. But it comes with a cost. What cost? Tom and Meredith exchanged glances. Someone must stay in the room until dawn, she explained, maintaining the ritual boundary. I'll do it, I volunteered. No. Tom shook his head. This is Blackwood family responsibility. Has been for generations. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the windows like desperate fingers seeking entry. Generator should kick in, Tom said, but the emergency lights failed to activate. A knock came at the front door, 3 soft taps that nonetheless carried clearly through the house. Tom froze. No one should be out in this storm. Could be a neighbor, Meredith suggested. Someone seeking shelter. Another 3 knocks, slightly louder. We moved to the front room. Through the side light windows flanking the door, I could make out a figure on the porch. A woman in a pale dress, her outline blurred by the rain. She found us, Tom whispered. That's not possible. This property isn't in any town register. What about family registers? I asked. Would Thomas Blackwood's personal effects mention this ranch? Tom blanched. His journal might, if you read it in the archives. I didn't, I assured him. Never saw it. The knocking came again, more insistent now. Jack? A woman's voice called from outside, not Eleanor's, but Martha Weber's. Jack, are you in there? I need help. Martha? I moved toward the door, but Tom grabbed my arm. Rule of 3, he reminded me. Never speak to anyone who calls your name after midnight unless you see their face first. It's barely noon, I countered. The rule applies during spiritual disruptions too, Meredith explained. Time blurs when the barrier thins. Jack, please. Martha's voice broke with fear. She's coming. I can see her on the road. I pulled away from Tom and approached the door cautiously. Through the side light, I could see Martha's rain-soaked form clearly now, her gray hair plastered to her head, her clothes drenched. Ask her something only Martha would know, Tom suggested, his hand on his sidearm. I nodded. Martha, what was the 8th rule you taught me? A pause. Then, always carry protection. Sage and sweetgrass. I looked at Tom, who nodded reluctantly. I unlocked the door, keeping the chain attached, and opened it a crack. Martha's face appeared in the gap, her eyes wild with panic. Thank God, she breathed. I followed your tracks from town. Eleanor's everywhere. The diner, the station, the street corners. She's looking for something. For us, Tom said grimly. For me specifically, I'd wager. I closed the door to remove the chain, then reopened it to let Martha inside. As she stepped over the threshold, I noticed something odd. Her clothes were soaked, yet she left no wet footprints on the hardwood floor. Rule 18 materialized in my mind. When the impossible occurs, trust your instincts over your eyes. I stepped back, reaching for my weapon. You're not Martha. The woman who looked like Martha Weber smiled, her lips stretching too wide for her face. Clever boy, she said, her voice changing, deepening. But too late. Behind her, lightning illuminated the porch, revealing another figure approaching the house. A woman in a beige dress, her ghostly form gliding through the rain without disturbing it. The real Eleanor Winters had arrived. Tom, gun! I shouted, drawing my service weapon and aiming at the Martha thing. Blackwood already had his sidearm out, moving with the speed of a man who'd spent decades in law enforcement. Down, he commanded. The Martha thing's face rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Her features melted, rearranging into a man's visage, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with a star-shaped badge pinned to his chest. Hello, grandson, the thing said in a voice like gravel. Been a while. Tom's gun trembled. You're not him. Close enough. the apparition replied. I've worn many faces over the years. Poor Martha's was just convenient. I kept my weapon trained on the creature, though instinct told me bullets would be useless. What are you? The thing turned its gaze to me. I'm what happens when a guilty soul tries to cheat justice through sacrifice. Thomas Blackwood didn't die to seal any breach. He died to escape her. It jerked its head toward the door, where Eleanor's form now stood on the threshold, prevented from entering by some invisible barrier. Rule 19, Meredith whispered from behind Tom's desk. No spirit may enter a home uninvited if the bloodline that wronged them dwells within. The thing wearing Thomas Blackwood Sr.'s face laughed, a dry, rattling sound. So many rules. Does he tell you why they work, Deputy? They're not protection. They're prison bars. They turned back to Tom. Your family has been my jailers for generations. I'm merely the warden. Tom's expression hardened. You feed on her pain, her rage. You've kept her bound to this plane for a century. I merely maintain the balance your grandfather disrupted, the entity countered. He killed an innocent woman, then took his own life rather than face consequences. Such acts tear the fabric between worlds. Outside, Eleanor pressed her palms against the invisible barrier, her face a mask of anguish. Rain passed through her form, yet she remained solid enough that I could see the details of her century-old clothing, the pearl hairpin that should have been in her hair now sitting on Tom's desk. What do you want? I asked the entity. Freedom, it replied simply. The same thing she wants. It gestured to Eleanor. A century is long enough to pay for another's crimes, don't you think? And if we free you both, Tom asked cautiously, what then? The thing smiled, teeth too numerous and sharp in its borrowed face. Then the slate is wiped clean. Eleanor finds peace. I return to my domain. Medicine Bow returns to normal. No more ghosts. No more rules. You're lying, Meredith stated flatly. Walter's journal described you. You're not some neutral cosmic jailer. You're a trickster entity, a carrion feeder on tragedy. The thing's smile didn't waver. Such harsh words, librarian. I merely serve natural law, action and consequence, debt and repayment. Tom lowered his gun slightly. What's the price? There's always a price with your kind. Smart man. The entity nodded. The price is simple. A confession. Public. Recorded. The full truth about Eleanor Winters and Thomas Blackwood Sr., acknowledged by his descendant. Tom's jaw tightened. You want me to destroy my family's reputation? I want you to free her, the entity corrected, pointing to Eleanor's ghost. Truth is the key to her chains, and to mine. Eleanor's expression changed as our eyes met through the doorway. The anguish remained, but something else flickered across her features. Determination. She raised her hand to the invisible barrier and traced a symbol I recognized from Tom's ritual book. A warning. Tom, I said quietly, this isn't right. This thing is manipulating us. The entity's borrowed face twisted with annoyance. The deputy thinks himself wise after less than a day knowing our secrets. Your family has kept these truths buried for generations, Thomas. How many have suffered for your grandfather's crime? Don't listen, Meredith urged. Rule 20. Never trust an entity that shifts forms. They speak only in half-truths. The entity moved with sudden, liquid speed, crossing the room to tower over Meredith. Enough with your rules, old woman. Tom fired, the gunshot deafening in the confines of the house. The bullet passed through the entity without effect, embedding itself in the wall beyond. Conventional weapons, the thing chided. After all these years, you should know better. I remembered Martha's tin in my pocket. In one motion, I withdrew it, struck a match against the doorframe, and lit the sage and sweetgrass. The entity hissed, recoiling from the smoke. "Party tricks," it spat, but kept its distance. "Tom," I called, "the ritual book. Now." Blackwood reached for the leather volume while maintaining his position between the entity and Meredith. "What are you thinking?" "That thing wants something from us," I reasoned, "which means we have power here, and Eleanor's trying to communicate." I moved to the door where Eleanor remained outside the barrier, her eyes fixed on mine, intense with urgency. "What are you doing?" the entity demanded, its borrowed form flickering between Thomas Blackwood Sr. and Martha Weber. "She cannot enter." "I know," I replied, keeping the smoldering herbs between us. "Rule 19. But that doesn't mean I can't speak with her." Tom joined me, ritual book in hand. "Jack, be careful." I addressed Eleanor directly. "You've been trying to tell your story. I'm listening now." Eleanor's ghost pressed her hand against the barrier again, her fingers spreading as if touching glass. I mirrored the gesture from my side, not quite making contact. Images flooded my mind. Brief, fragmented scenes like damaged film. Eleanor writing letters at a desk, meeting Thomas Blackwood Sr., secretly behind the Virginian. A baby's cradle being built in secret. The argument in room 307. Thomas drawing his revolver, Eleanor falling, not jumping. Thomas staging the scene, and finally, Thomas weeks later writing in his journal before placing his revolver under his chin. But there was more. Thomas's ghost rising from his body, confused, lost. The entity appearing, offering a bargain. A ritual performed in blood to bind both spirits to Medicine Bow. Generations of Blackwoods maintaining the prison of rules and lies. I gasped, breaking contact. "Tom, your grandfather didn't bind her through sacrifice. He made a deal with that thing. A deal to keep them both here, their fates intertwined." The entity snarled, its form now fluctuating rapidly between different faces. Thomas Sr., Martha, Pete from the hotel, Ellie from dispatch. "Enough. That's why the rules work," I continued, the pieces falling into place. "They're not containing just Eleanor. They're containing them both. A shared prison." Tom's face paled. "All these years. Your family maintained the rules out of duty," I said. "But you never knew the whole truth." The entity stabilized into Thomas Blackwood Sr.'s form again. "The rules are unraveling," it stated coldly. "Soon I'll be free regardless of your actions. The question is whether Eleanor joins me in freedom or remains trapped alone." Tom opened the ritual book. "There's another way." He pointed to a page featuring a complex symbol surrounded by text in a language I didn't recognize. The true releasing ritual. Not containment. Freedom. "That won't work," the entity sneered. "It requires blood of the bloodline that committed the original wrong." "My blood," Tom said simply. "Freely given, not taken. Unlike my grandfather's sacrifice." The entity's confidence faltered. "You wouldn't." Outside, Eleanor watched, her expression hopeful for the first time. "Jack," Tom turned to me, his voice steady. "You need to get Eleanor's possessions back to room 307. All of them. The hairpin, the letter, everything. They need to be there when I perform the ritual. That thing will try to stop me," I pointed out, "which is why I'm staying here, keeping it occupied." Tom handed me a folded page from the ritual book. "Instructions. You'll need Martha's help." The entity lunged forward, only to be repelled by the sage smoke. "This changes nothing," it growled. "Medicine Bow sits on a convergence. Other entities will come. Without the rules, chaos will follow." We'll create new rules, Meredith stated firmly. Honest ones, based on truth rather than deception. I collected Eleanor's hairpin and documents, securing them in my jacket. What about Eleanor? She's still outside the barrier. Tom smiled sadly. Rule 21. A spirit follows what it held dear in life. She'll follow her possessions, Jack. She'll follow you to the hotel. The entity's form began to destabilize, stretching and compressing like a reflection in warped glass. If you leave this house, Deputy, I will hunt you through town. The storm has emptied the streets. No witnesses. No help. That's where you're wrong, I countered. The people of Medicine Bow have lived with these rules for generations. They know more than you think. I turned to Tom. How do I get back to town? That thing disabled my truck. Tom tossed me his keys. Garage, blue pickup. Go out the back door. The ritual boundary extends to the tree line. You'll have a head start. The entity howled with rage, its form dissolving into smoke that pressed against the ceiling and walls, searching for weakness. Rule 22, Meredith called as I headed for the back of the house. Dawn cleanses all. If you can't win, survive until sunrise. I paused at the rear door, looking back at Tom. What will happen to you? I'll be fine. The lie sat plainly on his face. Just get those items to room 307 by 3:15 a.m. That's when she died. That's when the veil will be finished. Outside, rain continued to pour. I could see Tom's pickup in the open garage, 20 yards of exposed ground between me and transportation. I took a deep breath, clutching the sage tin and the ritual instructions. Then I ran. Behind me, glass shattered as windows broke throughout the Blackwood house. The entity's rage manifested in physical destruction, but the protection held, for now. I reached the truck, fumbling with the keys as rain soaked me to the skin. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the downpour. As I reversed out of the garage, I saw Eleanor's ghostly form materialize beside the vehicle, keeping pace effortlessly as I accelerated down the muddy drive. The entity wouldn't be far behind. The rules were unraveling, and with them, the fragile balance of Medicine Bow. I had until 3:15 a.m. to reach room 307 and help free a century-old spirit from her prison of lies and pain. I just hoped Tom Blackwood would survive his family's final atonement. The drive back to Medicine Bow became a nightmare of its own. Rain turned the dirt road to mud that grabbed at the tires, threatening to trap us miles from town. Lightning struck a fence post 50 yards away, the crack of thunder following instantly. Eleanor's ghost kept pace with the truck, gliding over the sodden earth without touching it. Her presence beside me should have been terrifying, but instead felt strangely comforting, like having a guardian rather than a revenant. My watch read 7:23 p.m. Hours yet until 3:15 a.m. But I needed to prepare. Needed help. Main Street was deserted when I finally reached town. Sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere yards. The Virginian loomed at the end of the street, windows glowing with warm light that belied the hotel's haunted reputation. I parked in front of Martha's shop, hoping the real Martha might be inside. Eleanor's ghost hesitated, then drifted toward the shop's entrance, passing through the locked door as easily as through the rain. Taking that as a sign, I followed, using Tom's keys to search for one that might open the back entrance to Sage and Dusty Treasures. The third key worked. Inside, the shop was dark and still. "Martha?" I called, keeping my voice low. No answer came. I used my flashlight, sweeping the beam across crowded shelves and furniture displays. The rocking chair that had moved on its own last night sat motionless in the center of the room. Eleanor materialized near a display case, her spectral finger pointing to something inside. I approached cautiously, shining my light on a collection of antique jewelry. Among the pieces lay a tarnished wedding band inscribed with tiny letters. I opened the case and removed the ring, reading the inscription, TB to EW, forever yours. Another piece of their story. A wedding ring never officially given. He did love you, I said softly. Eleanor's form flickered, then stabilized. Her lips moved, though no sound emerged. I couldn't make out the words. The shop's front door rattled violently, jolting me from the moment. Through the rain-streaked window, a figure stood on the sidewalk. Human-shaped but wrong somehow, its proportions shifting subtly as it moved. The entity had followed us to town. I pocketed the wedding band and retreated to the back room. Eleanor followed, her expression urgent as she pointed to a shelf of mason jars filled with dried herbs and powders. Protection? I guessed, grabbing several jars labeled sage, salt, and iron filings. A crash from the front room announced the entity's entrance. "Deputy," it called, using Tom Blackwood's voice now. "Let's talk this through reasonably." Rule 20 echoed in my mind. Never trust an entity that shifts forms. I dumped salt across the threshold of the back room, remembering Martha's instructions from the archives. Then I lit more sage from my Tim, filling the small space with pungent smoke. "I know you have her possessions," the entity continued, closer now. "Give them to me, and I'll ensure Eleanor finds peace. That's what you want, isn't it?" Its lies came easily, smoothly, the practiced deception of a century spent manipulating the living and the dead. I checked my watch, 7:41 p.m. Still hours to go. Rule 23, I whispered to myself. When cornered by an entity, create a diversion, not a confrontation. I grabbed a bottle of lamp oil from a shelf and unscrewed the cap. The entity's footsteps reached the other side of the door, a shadow visible beneath it. "Last chance, deputy," it warned. I splashed the oil along the floor, then lit a match and dropped it. Flames bloomed instantly, spreading across the wooden floorboards. I crashed through the back window, glass cutting my arm as I tumbled out into the rain. Behind me, fire alarms blared. The entity shrieked, not in pain, but frustration. I'd bought time, but at the cost of Martha's shop. Eleanor waited in the alley, her form more transparent now, weakening with distance from her possessions. I retrieved them from my pocket, and she solidified slightly. "We need somewhere safe until 3 a.m., I told her, knowing she couldn't respond but hoping she understood. She drifted toward the street, then stopped, pointing urgently at a figure hurrying through the rain, Martha Weber herself, rushing toward her burning shop. "Martha!" I called, waving my uninjured arm. She turned, eyes widening at the sight of me, with Eleanor's ghost hovering nearby. "Jack, what happened?" "That thing, the entity bound with Eleanor, it followed us from the Blackwood Ranch. I had to create a diversion." Martha's gaze moved between me and the ghost. "You can see her clearly now. That means the barriers are almost gone." She grabbed my arm. "Come on, the fire department will handle the shop. We need to get off the street." We hurried through the rain to the diner 2 blocks away, the windows dark but a light visible from the kitchen. Martha knocked a specific pattern, 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. Hazel, the diner's owner, opened the door, her eyes growing round at the sight of Eleanor floating behind us. "Inside, quick," she ordered, ushering us in before looking up and down the street. The diner was empty of customers but full of people. Pete from the Virginian, Ellie from Dispatch, Roy from the hardware store, and a half-dozen other Medicine Bow residents I recognized. "Word travels fast," Martha explained, seeing my surprise. "When the library caught fire and you fled with Tom, people knew something was happening. Hazel locked the door behind us. Is it true? The woman in beige is free? Not exactly, I replied, setting Eleanor's possessions on the counter. She's still bound to these items and to the hotel. But the entity that's been bound with her, that's free, or close to it. Salt the doors and windows, Martha instructed the gathered townspeople. Sage in the corners, Rule 24, collective sanctuary multiplies protection. As they moved to follow her directions, I explained everything I'd learned. Eleanor's true relationship with Thomas Blackwood Sr., her murder disguised as suicide, the bargain Thomas made with the entity, and Tom's plan to set her free with a ritual at 3:15 a.m. So, Tom's still at the ranch? Ellie asked, concern etching her weathered face. With Meredith, the house has protections. For now, Martha said grimly. But if the entity has grown strong enough to leave the hotel and follow you across town, those protections may not hold until 3:15. I checked my watch. 8:17 p.m. 7 hours to go. We need to reach Tom. Warn him, I said. Ellie shook her head. Phone lines are down from the storm. Cell service, too. Someone needs to go back, Pete suggested. Too dangerous, Martha countered. That thing is out there, and it will be watching the roads. Rain hammered against the diner's windows. In the glow of the emergency lights, Eleanor's ghost watched our discussion with sorrowful eyes. What about the ritual itself? I asked Martha. Have you seen it performed before? Once, when I was young, she replied. Walter Blackwood, Tom's father, performed a smaller version to contain a minor spirit that had attached itself to a family heirloom. She studied the ritual page Tom had given me. This is different, bigger, and it requires Blackwood blood. What if Tom doesn't make it to the hotel? Roy voiced what everyone was thinking. Martha's expression grew solemn. Then Eleanor remains trapped, and so does Medicine Bow. A crash from outside made everyone jump. Through the window, we could see a streetlight had fallen, blocking part of Main Street. No wind could have toppled it. The entity was making its presence known. It's toying with us, Pete muttered. No, I realized aloud. It's isolating the Virginian, cutting off access routes. I turned to the assembled townspeople. How many of you know the rules? Hands raised around the room. And how many know about the entity? The truth about Thomas Blackwood Sr. and Eleanor? Fewer hands this time, but still several. The rules have power because of knowledge, because people believe them and follow them, I said. An idea forming. What if we created a new rule? Right now? Martha tilted her head. Rules develop over observation, pattern. They can't just be invented, but they can evolve, Ellie interjected. When I started at Dispatch 30 years ago, there were 15 rules Walter Blackwood had documented. Now there are more than 20. Exactly, I nodded. The rules adapt as needed, so let's adapt them now. Over the next hour, we crafted our plan. I studied the ritual instructions while others gathered supplies, candles, salt, herbs from Martha's collection saved from the shop, chalk for drawing symbols. At 11:30 p.m., the diner's lights flickered, then died. Only battery-powered lanterns remained. It's growing stronger, Martha warned. We can't wait until 3:15. We need to secure room 307 now, prepare it for the ritual. The entity will be watching the hotel, Pete reminded us. Which is why we need a diversion, I said, turning to Eleanor's ghost. And I think I know what will work. The plan was simple but dangerous. Half our group would create a distraction at the sheriff's station, using the rules about salt lines and sage to protect themselves, while luring the entity with false information about Eleanor's possessions being stored there. Meanwhile, Martha, Pete, and I would enter the Virginian through the service entrance, make our way to room 307, and prepare for the ritual. Eleanor would accompany us, bound to her possessions. Ellie checked her watch. Almost midnight. If we're doing this, we should move soon. I gathered Eleanor's items, the hairpin, the ring, the letter, and secured them in my breast pocket. Remember, once inside the hotel, Rule 10, never use the elevator during the disturbance, and count the stairs. Rule 11, Pete added, touch metal at regular intervals when walking the corridors. Martha nodded. And most importantly, Rule 25, when confronted by an entity, unanimous belief in protection creates protection. The townspeople moved with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to living by rules others would find strange. Salt was distributed, sage bundles prepared, instructions memorized. Eleanor's ghost drifted close to me, her expression more determined than I'd yet seen it. In the lantern light, I could almost imagine her as she'd been in life. A young teacher brave enough to follow her heart across the country, only to be betrayed by the man she loved. We'll set this right, I promised her softly, one way or another. Outside, the rain had stopped. The wind still whipped through the streets. The fallen streetlights sparked occasionally, casting brief flashes that illuminated the empty road to the Virginian. My watch read 12:17 a.m. 3 hours until the moment of Eleanor's death a century ago. 3 hours to prepare for a ritual that might finally free her and Medicine Bow from the wake of 100 years of lies. The town had survived by following rules born of deception. Now, we would forge new rules from truth. And if Tom Blackwood couldn't reach us in time, I'd already decided. My blood might not be Blackwood blood, but it was the blood of Medicine Bow's protector now. Some prices were worth paying to set things right. The plaque on room 307 at the Virginian reads simply, Eleanor Winters, 1886 to 1912. Truth endures. Tourists snap photos of it, not understanding its significance. They don't see what I see when I walk these hallways during my night patrol. The faint shimmer of ritual salt still embedded in the floorboards, or the tiny carved symbols on the doorframe. They never ask why a small bouquet of fresh sweetgrass appears outside the door on the 19th of every month. Tom Blackwood's blood did free Eleanor that night, though not in the way we'd planned. When he finally arrived at 3:10 a.m., badly wounded and soaked through, the entity had already breached the hotel. We'd managed to secure room 307 with the strongest protections Martha and the townspeople could devise. But our salt lines were crumbling. The ritual required blood freely given at the site of the original wrong. Tom dragged himself to the window of 307, the same window Eleanor had fallen through a century before. As the entity battered against our defenses, he completed the ritual with his final strength. I still hear his last words on quiet nights. For my family's debt. For Medicine Bow's peace. Dawn came minutes later. The entity dissipated with a wail that rattled windows throughout town. Eleanor's ghost transformed before our eyes, the blood-stained dress replaced by clean clothes, her expression peaceful as she faded into gentle light. The rules changed after that night. Some vanished entirely, others transformed. We still count steps on staircases out of habit, but nothing happens if we lose track. Mirrors reflect only what they should. The elevators work at all hours. But new patterns emerged, new observations that grew into rules. Nothing malevolent, just the quiet strangeness of a place where the veil remains thin. Room 307 stays booked almost continuously, filled with guests who report the best sleep of their lives. The wedding band I found in Martha's shop now sits in a small display case in the hotel lobby. Twice a year, on Eleanor's birthday and the anniversary of her death, the gold gleams as if newly polished, no matter how tarnished it was the day before. Sheriff's deputies in Medicine Bow now serve as unofficial town historians. I've taken up this duty alongside my regular patrols, documenting not just the rules, but the stories behind them. Truth, rather than superstition. Martha rebuilt her shop with community help. The sign now reads, Eleanor's Treasures and Curiosities. She claims certain items still move occasionally, but gently, almost playfully. As for me, I no longer keep the rules in a little notebook. They've been properly recorded in the town archives, alongside Thomas Blackwood Sr.'s confession, preserved in the ritual Tom performed with his blood. New residents still get the talk when they move to Medicine Bow. Things work a little differently here, we tell them. We explain about counting stairs and touching metal doorknobs, not because anything terrible will happen if they don't, but because these small observances honor what happened here, both the tragedy and the healing. Sometimes, on April nights when the wind quiets to a whisper, visitors to the Virginian report seeing a woman in period dress walking the third-floor hallway. She doesn't shriek or cry or throw herself through windows. She simply walks, occasionally pausing to look out at the town that finally acknowledged her truth. We don't call her the woman in beige anymore. Her name was Eleanor Winters, and Medicine Bow remembers her.